I've never kept a record, but probably about a third of my annual big bike mileage involves some sort of group riding. For those of you who've never tried it, it's quite a different experience to riding on your own. I'm not saying it's better, it's just different. As with most things, there are upsides and downsides. By definition, it's more of a social activity, at least when it's time for a coffee or lunch break. Some of my friends even have intercoms and like to chat to each other while they're riding, but I haven't quite decided yet whether or not that's for me. You get to discover roads that you've never ridden on before. It's safer insofar as if you have an accident, a puncture or other mechanical problem, then your mates will be there to lend a hand. I find it less tiring in that you follow the bike in front rather than having to remember to keep an eye on the sat-nav, and watching your mates' brake lights, lean angle, etc. means you have advance notice of a sharp bend or other hazard up ahead, like gravel on the road or a large vehicle coming round the bend. I'm sure I've left some out. Now, some would argue that negatives include the fact that only the lead rider is happy with the pace. More on that in a minute. You can't always stop when you want, either for a drink, a toilet or fuel stop, or just to admire the scenery and stretch your legs. In fact, you lose your independence altogether, and that's a big red flag for many riders who see motorcycling as a sanctuary in which to be on their own and contemplate the meaning of life with no interruptions, distractions, or instructions from anyone else. I totally get the appeal of riding on your own, and as I said, I'm not trying to prove that group riding is better than solo, but as I have had quite a few requests in the comments section on how to organise and get the most out of a group ride, footage of which, like here, I do use quite often in my videos simply because I think having a couple of bikes in front just makes it more interesting to watch. So I thought I'd give you a few tips and tricks that you might like to try out if you fancy putting together a group ride with your friends. Note that I'll be talking exclusively about day trips here. Longer group tours involving overnight stays with 3 meals a day obviously require a fair bit more planning. Now, kind of stating the obvious, but groups can vary in size from 2 or 3 bikes right up to traffic busting clusters of 20 or more. A day trip isn't a particularly difficult thing to put together. It is, after all, just a bit of fun. But I'd say the single most important thing is to find a group of like-minded people with roughly similar bikes and levels of experience. Remember that the only person happy with the pace is the lead rider. If the others behind are straining at the leash, desperate to push on at warp speed, or conversely are finding it difficult to keep up, either through lack of experience or because they're on a less powerful bike, then it's no fun for anyone. That said, the very first group ride I did when we first moved down to the Algarve was on Mrs. RM's trusty little 9 horsepower Honda Vision 110. I just sold my BMW F900XR and was waiting on my Trident. I was without a big bike for a couple of weeks and so didn't really have any choice. The guys on their big bikes had to wait for me, especially on the uphill sections, but team spirit prevailed. We survived, and as one of the guys said as I apologised over lunch for holding everybody up, at least we saved on the petrol. We tend to use WhatsApp groups as a starting point. I'm in 3 different groups totaling about 50 regular riders. Not everyone is an organiser though, some prefer just to tag along, which is fine, but on average there's about 1 ride per week being put together by somebody. There are no hard and fast rules, but if it's me doing the organising, for example, I'll post a message about 3 to 5 days in advance suggesting 1 or 2 dates, and then the other members chime in. I'll suggest an approximate route, lunchtime destination, and 1 or more dates. Once we know who'll be coming along, we set a meeting point somewhere that's central for everyone. Ideally, there'll be a fuel station just before you arrive, a cafe for those who want a quick collation before setting off, and easy parking. Some organisers don't set a limit on the number of riders, which is great in theory, but you sometimes end up with mega groups of 20 or more bikes that can literally stretch back 1 kilometre or more on the road, and as the overall pace tends to drop the more bikes there are, this can prove frustrating for car drivers stuck at the back of the peloton looking to get past. I personally get most from rides with about 4 to 6 bikes, and so you will often find that entries are closed in the WhatsApp group once that number has been reached. So, how does the day actually pan out? Well, you begin by riding, usually on your own, to the designated rendezvous point, filling up beforehand if necessary. It's obviously not a problem if someone has to fill up during the ride because they only have a small tank or a fuel-guzzling Ducati, but if one rider stops, the whole group has to stop, of course, so it's each rider's responsibility to minimise fuel stops. The actual riding involves following the leader in more or less a staggered formation, no overtaking, no reason to normally, and perhaps counterintuitively, but importantly, keeping an eye out for the rider behind you. If a rider has a problem, they stop, and so will all the riders behind them, but the only way those ahead can react is if they lose sight of the bike in their mirrors. Eventually, as each bike ahead comes to a stop, the information gets to the leader at the front and the whole group will come to a stop. I think this kind of unplanned stop has happened to me only once, and it wasn't for anything serious. With regards to the route, and so that nobody misses a turning, it's common practice to use what's known as the second man drop-off system. This is how it works. At the front goes the ride leader, the one who knows the route and or has a sat-nav. Then at the back of the group you have the sweeper. They are the only two riders who never change position for the duration of the ride, and to make things easier, especially in larger groups, they often wear high-vis jackets. When the leader arrives at a junction, or roundabout like here, the second rider immediately behind the leader, known as the marker, will stop in a safe place at the side of the road near the junction and signal to the riders behind where they need to go. Once all the riders except the sweeper have passed, the marker then rejoins the group just ahead of the sweeper. Everyone takes a turn at this. Here are two occasions when I was called on to stop and indicate that the group needed to turn right. Now, this might seem like organisational overkill, and yes, when you only have a handful of riders it is, but in larger groups like these, with a dozen riders that can become separated by traffic lights, junctions or other road users, it just ensures that nobody misses a turn. Remember that not all riders will have studied the route or have navigation or a sense of direction, so it's important that the group stick together. Don't be afraid of mini stops of just a couple of minutes to stretch your legs, take in the view or have a quick drink. Most rides I've been on involve meeting at a given point for coffee, then riding to another coffee break halfway and then pushing on to the lunch stop. When I'm organising though, I prefer shorter rides of a couple of hours, and I therefore tend to skip the midway coffee break. Here's a tip: if you are in a larger group, small rural cafes can get quite overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of a dozen riders or more. So I tend to take my own snacks, a bottle of ambient temperature water, a can of refrigerated Coke that I made this nice bubble wrap cover for to keep cold, some sweets in a Tupperware box, and some individually wrapped Oreos, as unlike most chocolate biscuits, these don't melt in the heat. I say individual, they're actually wrapped in packets of 4, so I also carry one of these IKEA bag clips to seal the bag up, as I usually only eat 2 at a time. Now, I've probably been on about 50 group rides, and in terms of incidents and at the risk of tempting the devil, there haven't really been that many. No punctures, no accidents, nobody getting lost. A couple of bikes have been dropped at a standstill or very low speed when manoeuvring. There was one guy who had a bit of a turn during lunch, I remember, probably because of the heat. And this friend, whose 1200 RT was called upon for some light goat herding duties, but that's about it. Being British, I do prepare for the worst, however, and carry a small set of tools, puncture repair kit, a small electric air compressor and a rain jacket, as well as the drinks and snacks I mentioned earlier. But these are relatively local day trips, and we rarely stray more than about 150 kilometres or 100 miles from home. And of course, being part of a group means that there's assistance immediately on hand if something does go wrong. I'm also a recent convert to these hiplocks, which I use to attach my helmet to the bike. They're not exactly cutting-edge security, think of them as reusable cable ties, but they only cost about €10. They're super easy to carry in a tank or tail bag, and great when you're just stopping for a drink or some lunch. Saves you having to carry the helmet inside, and they're enough, I think, to dissuade the casual opportunist thief. And while we're on the subject of cool gear, remember you can still get 10% off Roadskin jeans and Tripmachine leather accessories with the RocketMan discount code. All links in the description. The lunch stop, I suppose, is the main event, at least socially speaking. Now, some of the rides here, usually those organised by my French friends, involve quite gastronomic restaurants with olives, bread and pâté for starters, and copious amounts of red wine and cheese. Lovely, but all I want to do after a meal like that, especially when it's hot, is have a siesta, and there's the ride home to think about. On my rides, the ones I organise, we tend to favour lighter snacks, sandwiches, salads, maybe a cheeseburger and chips in the winter. After all, I go on these day trips for the company and the scenery, not because I'm hungry. Anyway, however Epicurean the lunch, once it's over, it's usually every man for himself, and we all make our own way home, sometimes in subgroups of 2 or 3 bikes, but often solo, as in this clip. Let me know in the comments about your experiences, any unforgettable incidents that you've had, good or bad, and are you a group rider or do you prefer to wing it on your own? And as always, thanks for watching.